Coming up, Kirk Herbstreit weighs in with some big thoughts on Georgia-Clemson, and we examine the first game for the defending champions, Alabama. It's all on the way. Game week is here on SEC Country Live. Hello, everybody. Welcome into SEC Country Live. I'm Brandon Adams. Great to have you with us as we get started on a game week with action all across the SEC over the course of the next few days. Of course, Tennessee on Thursday, a bunch of games on Saturday. Ole Miss actually plays on Monday. So we're going to try to cover all of those bases over the course of our time with you here today. And, of course, we'll look forward to doing that with a special guest coming up in just a few minutes' time. A little less than 20 minutes from now, we'll say hello to Mr. College Football himself, Tony Barnhart. We'll talk Georgia, Clemson with him, Alabama, Miami, LSU out in Pasadena against UCLA. A lot of fun games to kick off the upcoming season, so we'll do a lot of that with Tony Barnhart and all of you over the course of our program here today. I want to start, though, with something we had a chance to do a few minutes ago, spend some time with the terrific ESPN college football analyst Kirk Herbstreit. This is our Above the Fold here today as we take a look at the big story around the SEC. It is obviously the big game for Georgia against Clemson. You don't get a lot of these top five matchups to open a season, but you do get one with Georgia and Clemson. And it was very interesting to hear Herbstreit a moment ago echoing something that I've been saying quite a bit. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've said it on this show at some point in time as well, which is that the general feeling out there is, well, it's great to have highly rated Georgia versus highly rated Clemson to start the season. That's a fun season opening game. But there has been this general consensus that somehow the result actually doesn't matter all that much. And whichever of these two teams were to lose the game is still in a fine position to make the college football playoff, easily running the table with their games after the season opener and basically still getting a fairly clear path towards punching a ticket for the college football playoff. And obviously that could happen. But it was nice to hear Kirk Herbstreit in a conversation I was able to have with him and some other media folks were a part of a few minutes ago. It was nice to hear Herbstreit actually express what I think is actually the more accurate sentiment, which is no, there is a lot at stake for Georgia-Clemson on Saturday. And for Georgia fans who kind of get tired of hearing about Clemson kind of running roughshod over a fairly weak, watered-down ACC and feeling like, well, if Clemson was forced to play the kind of schedule that Georgia's forced to play each and every Saturday, that life for the Tigers wouldn't be quite so easy, things wouldn't be quite so good. Maybe a little bit of a voice to that idea from Herbstreit here, because what Herbstreit essentially says is, if Georgia fans believe that, if SEC fans who are not necessarily Georgia fans but wouldn't mind seeing Clemson taken down a peg, that if you believe that, we got a chance to do something about it on Saturday. Herbstreit essentially suggesting that Clemson's playoff life could be really put in jeopardy if Georgia gets the win on Saturday. So as a way of starting off our show and our conversation here today, maybe a little bit of a reminder from Herbstreit that no, the winner of this Georgia-Clemson game truly matters, and for the loser, the road could be pretty rough after that. Let me let you hear Kirk Herbstreit. This is from a couple of minutes ago.
For people that look at this game and think, well, it's early in the year, you can lose this game and recover, all true. The only thing I would throw out there is a reminder that both these teams have a pretty good chance, no matter what the result is, of winning a lot of games. Potentially, a lot of people are predicting both these teams to get into the top four or be right around the top four. It especially, I say this for Clemson, because they don't have a lot of top 25 opponents coming up after they play Georgia. They got maybe one or two, but not a lot. You lose this game if you're Clemson, and then you win out and you win the ACC. And let's just say, for argument's sake, Georgia wins the East and they go to Atlanta and they lose a close one to Alabama. And now we're starting to look at the committee. One of the words that they use is cluster. They look at a cluster of teams. How do they separate clusters within this committee? They either look at conference champion, they look at head-to-head, things like that, and strength of schedule. But head-to-head would apply to the Clemson-Georgia matchup.
So interesting to hear Kirk Herbstreit say that head-to-head situation would really apply there, and I think that's really interesting, and I think it speaks to something we've talked about before, which is that if you're the winner of this game, obviously you get the big trophy in the wall, you get the big head-to-head win against a team the caliber of a Georgia beating Clemson or a Clemson beating Georgia. But on the other side of this, don't be so quick to assume that you're just going to march right into the college football playoff by running the table after that. As Kirk said, it brings about a fairly unpleasant comparison for Clemson, who may later on say, hey, we're the ACC champions. We ran the table. We won the league. That's been good enough to make the playoff in the years past. But at this point in time, Herbstreit says, yeah, but you didn't play Georgia to start those years in previous years. All of a sudden now we've kind of got something that we can compare you to. We can compare you to Georgia. And if Georgia, to use the analogy that Kirk used there, if Georgia's a 12-1 team, SEC runner-up, similar to what it was in 2018, it wasn't a one-loss team back then, but it was a team that played Alabama very close in the SEC championship game. All of a sudden, Georgia can say, yeah, but in this particular case, we bolstered our resume week 1 by beating Clemson. And Clemson can say, well, we're ACC champions, but all of a sudden Kirk says, yeah, but head-to-head's got to matter. And if you're talking about a 12-1 Georgia team who's not the SEC champion but does have a head-to-head win against Clemson compared to a 12-1 Clemson team who's ACC champs but lost head-to-head versus Georgia, you better believe that the committee's job at that point in time, and listen, I'm a Georgia fan, of course, and so people can, say I'm being partisan here, but I think a lot of SEC fans would agree with this. The committee's job at that point in time is to put Georgia in the playoff ahead of Clemson, whether Georgia wins the SEC or not, because it beat Clemson head-to-head. And if the head-to-head matchup's not going to matter, then what's the point of even playing the game? Now, frankly, I don't quite trust the committee to figure that out and get that right the same way that Kirk Herbstreit did there. I'm not sure I quite trust the committee to that degree. But I think that the way that Herbstreit lays it out is a pretty accurate way to lay that out all the way around. In fact, let me let you hear some more from Kirk Herbstreit. I had a chance to be a part of a phone call with him just before our show began today. More on what Georgia can do to Clemson if it beats them, the Tigers, coming up on Saturday. This is Kirk Herbstreit again.
So if you're Clemson and you lose this game, it puts you on the back burner, in my view, based on what the committee's done in recent years. And I think that would give Clemson fans a little bit of anxiousness about this game. They need to win this game. Even though it's week 1, you do not want to get caught up in a cluster against Georgia and have the committee say, well, they lost to these guys early in the year, so we're going to give Georgia the advantage.
So I think that's really interesting, and I think it does set up a comparison that could work to Georgia's advantage if they win on Saturday. And as I said before, listen, there are a lot of SEC fans who got no love lost for Georgia, but I think there is also a lot of SEC fans that wouldn't mind seeing Georgia go out and get the win against Clemson because, frankly, there's an irritation about the fact that Clemson, for the most part, has skated through on an easy schedule all the years that it has to get to the point where it is a perennial playoff team. But interesting to hear Kirk Herbstreit give voice to the idea that, no, the game possibly matters for both these squads more than you might think. And I would say that for the SEC fan paying attention to Georgia, it may matter for the Georgia side of this a lot more than really anywhere. And to kind of keep that conversation going for a moment, I thought when the Georgia coach Kirby Smart spoke to the media on Tuesday, he gave a very interesting answer to a particular question. You may have watched the SEC network as of late, going back to a couple of weeks ago, going back to SEC Media Days, Marty and McGee, you know their personalities. Frankly, to be honest with you a little bit, I think that some of what Marty and McGee does is kind of phony shtick. It's kind of like the phony Southern shtick, sort of a Northerner's idea of a Southerner sometimes. But nonetheless, they do some good things, and they did some interesting interviews with the SEC coaches at SEC Media Days, and one of those was Kirby Smart. And in the conversation that Georgia coach Kirby Smart had with Marty McGee, he made it clear that he thinks that Georgia's eventually going to win a national championship. And frankly, the way in which Smart spoke about this at SEC Media Days with Marty McGee in interviews that have been airing seemingly around the clock on the SEC network, he spoke about this in a lot more candid fashion than he sometimes would when he's speaking to his own media that covers the Georgia Bulldogs locally. So when Smart was back with the reporters again in Athens on Tuesday, one of them asked him, hey, I heard you on the SEC network. You said that you think Georgia's going to eventually win a national championship. And the reporter caveated that by saying, obviously, a lot of other people do there as well. But in particular, you're the opinion that matters. You're Kirby Smart. You're the Georgia coach. Why is it that you think that Georgia's eventually going to win a national championship? Now, listen, you understand this. Smart saying these words this week has extra relevance because Smart's about to play a team on Saturday. His team is about to play a team that's won 2 college football playoff national championships. And when you look at Georgia, what it's done in recent seasons, where, you beat Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl, and that's a team that's been in the playoffs a couple of times, but actually hasn't won a playoff game yet. You beat Florida a couple of times. That's a team that, while, won the SEC East a year ago, has not qualified for the college football playoff. Bowl winning in Cincinnati, bowl winning against Baylor, 2 home head-to-head wins against Notre Dame. That kind of stuff matters, but it's not the same thing as playing and beating a team that's won a college football playoff national championship. And unfortunately, if you're a Georgia fan, you know this now, that Georgia's actually had 5 games in the Smart era against teams that either had or would go on to win college football playoff national championships. Georgia's lost all 5. And they've lost those 5 games by an average of 15 points. So in a game like what Georgia's about to play against Clemson, I think it's fair to say that Georgia probably has a little something extra to prove. That Georgia's got to prove it can do more than just beat the good teams. The Notre Dame type teams that make the college football playoff but have no shot of winning once they get there. Georgia's shown you it can beat that bunch, or it can beat Oklahoma. But can it beat a team like Clemson, who not only gets to the playoff each and every year, and in many instances actually won games when it has been there? And if it can do that, then Georgia's going to eventually kick in the door to win the national championship. I told you that Kirby Smart believes that's going to happen. And when Smart spoke to reporters on Tuesday night, he explained why he thinks that's going to happen. Confidence in his voice when he says this. Here's Kirby Smart.
Well, it has to be coming, right? I mean, if it's not coming, then what are we doing? I mean, so I don't look at it in perspective of when. I look at it in perspective of what's important now. What are we doing now? And I know the people in this organization. I know the administration. I know the people in the state. I know the people that love Georgia, and the energy, enthusiasm they have. It's always long overdue, right? I don't care if you won one 3 years ago, it's overdue. For me, that's the end game. That's the goal. That's what you're always trying to work towards. It doesn't make it a successful season or failure if you don't. I just don't look at things that way. I don't let that control my thought process in my life. But I certainly pursue excellence, and that's what excellence is.
I think it's a really interesting thing from Kirby Smart to speak as candidly as he does about the fact that he pursues excellence in his chosen profession. The definition of excellence is winning a national championship. It's not an easy thing to talk about sometimes when you know that that's how you're going to be judged in this and every season. And I don't think the championship window for Georgia is close to closing anytime soon. I believe that Georgia's going to remain a college football playoff contender for many years to come in the future. The talent that's in the program right now would seem to virtually guarantee that. However, games like this, where unfortunately Georgia has fallen short before, the idea that championship expectations are being embraced going into the game, I think is a level of candor that a lot of Georgia fans probably appreciate. And, you're left to wonder, well, is Georgia really ready to win a game like this? In light of some of the injuries they dealt with, or just in light of the fact that, there are plenty of non-Georgia fans who would say, oh, we've seen Georgia in this spot before. Georgia's let down. Georgia's not going to get it done. Georgia always Georgia's, or whatever it is that people say about that. That's clearly a little bit of a shadow that hangs over the program going into Saturday. So I'm going to Charlotte. I'll be in the game for Georgia Clemson. I'm super excited about it, not just as a fan of one of the teams, but also as just someone who just appreciates the rich storylines, the really unrivaled energy for a game like this. It's going to be huge, and I know a lot of folks are going to want to weigh in on whether it be a Georgia fan who thinks this is the year his team gets it done, or a non-Georgia fan who wants to remind UGA fans of the stuff they've suffered through in years past. A lot of folks want to weigh in on that. In fact, let's give you a chance to do that here before we move on with the rest of our show and hear from Tony Barnhart in a moment and talk about Alabama and Miami. Let me get a couple of comments here just for a moment. Brett Foster weighing in on the subject of LSU, saying, I guarantee that Coach O has made the defense a focal point this offseason. LSU's offense was hardly a problem last year. And, Brett, before we're done on today's show, we're going to talk more about LSU today, because I do think the road trip to Pasadena to play UCLA this weekend is very interesting. And I think that you're probably right about the defense. Obviously, the experiment of bringing back Bo Pelini as defensive coordinator a year ago was a disaster. It was a total failure. And I think great talents like Derek Stingley really suffered because of the bizarre system that I think the Pelini was trying to run a year ago. And I think the outlook is better for LSU defensively this year. And LSU is one of the teams that I expect to have a bounce back here this season. So we'll talk more about that game against UCLA before we're done here today. Jimmy Miller says that Kirby's the one to pull all of the preconceived notions out of the players' heads, focus on one game at a time, forget the national championship now. And I understand where you're coming from, and obviously most coaches do take the one game at a time approach, and, hey, we're not overlooking any opponent or anything like that. But listen, I also think, Jimmy, there is something to be said for just acknowledging the elephant that's in the room, that Georgia's not playing to win the SEC East. And it's not just playing to go to a nice bowl game. That after what Georgia has done in recent years, Georgia's playing for more than that. And frankly, in addition to the kind of championship expectations that come when you've had as much success as Georgia has had, minus actually winning the big one at the end of the season, it's also one of those things where Georgia, unfortunately, the last 3 years has kind of sort of started drifting a little further away from that, right? You go from a 2018 season in which, the year after the playoff, in which Georgia came close to winning the SEC championship, just barely missed the playoff, to 2019 where it got back to the SEC championship game. But this time the margin of defeat was much wider. LSU got a much easier win. And then last year not qualifying for the SEC championship at all. 3 consecutive years in which Georgia has finished lower in the end-of-season rankings than they started in the preseason rankings. So to acknowledge that, no, that's not good enough for Georgia, and that the definition of excellence is championships and better results than Georgia's had the last couple of seasons. I think it's probably smart for Kirby Smart, no pun intended, or any other coach to acknowledge what's obviously true, that we came here for a reason. It is to win championships, and anything less than that for this squad's going to not be good enough. Barry Gustine says, what about the Florida Gators? We'll talk some Florida in our comment section with all of you throughout the program here today. I do think that Florida Atlantic to open the season is a little bit of an interesting challenge. It's a Mike Stoops defensive coordinator situation with the Owls there. It's a FAU team that brings back a lot from a year ago. I think it'll be interesting to see how much both quarterbacks play on Saturday between Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson. It sounds like Richardson, as we've predicted around here for a while, remains a part of that quarterback discussion. So I think we'll talk a lot about Florida and Florida Atlantic and really the Gators in general as we kind of move through the show and move through the season there for sure. Jacob O'Neill, good to see you there as well. As we're getting ready to bring on Tony Barner on the show, let me squeeze in one more thing on Alabama-Miami before we do. We'll take a lot more of your comments on both Facebook and YouTube there as well. So when I look at Alabama-Miami on Saturday, here's like the one big question I'm kind of left with. Is Alabama a sure thing on Saturday against Miami? You know, when you start thinking about that game for the Crimson Tide, that's the one thing I'm left with. Because here's what you see. This will be the 9th consecutive year that Alabama has opened the season against a non-conference opponent on a neutral site. It's 9 consecutive years for Alabama there. And they've won all of those games by an average of 27 points. It's really been amazing how much Alabama has just obliterated teams that on paper look pretty good, much the same way this Miami team does going into Saturday. This is obviously a very different Alabama crew because it's a fresh, brand new quarterback, new offensive coordinator. But my goodness, for Alabama in these week 1 showdowns, they've been about as close to a given as you can possibly get. So comment section, we'll let you weigh in on that. We'll talk more Crimson Tide on the program here today. In fact, let's keep that going right now as we welcome in Mr. College Football. Terrific voice who's followed the SEC and all of college football for a long time. And Tony, welcome back to SEC Country Live. I appreciate your time, and I know you and I spoke a good bit before the start of last season, and there was just a frustration in the air, right? I mean, we were doing what we could to enjoy the games that were going to be played, but it didn't feel the same way. You know, no fans in the stands, or at least much fewer fans in the stands. To think about whether it be in Mercedes-Benz Stadium for Alabama-Miami on Saturday or Charlotte for Georgia-Clemson, this feels a lot more like the college football that you and I both love, and I know you're as happy about it as I am.
Oh, I certainly am, Brandon. Certainly am. Listen, this time last year, we knew we were going to get started. We had a start date of September 26th. What we didn't know was whether or not we were going to be able to finish, because there were contingencies and contingencies on top of contingencies to replace games. And when all was said and done, the SEC played 69 out of 71 games, which was a remarkable achievement. Now we got fans in the stands. I'm anxious to see what it's going to feel like on Saturday, because it's completely different.
No, I think you're exactly right about that. And let me start Georgia-Clemson here, and we'll kind of get to the other side with the Alabama stuff and the other rest of the SEC here in a moment. You know, we heard from Kirk Herbstreit a little early in the show that expressing something that I've said before, which I actually believe that the result of Georgia-Clemson matters, right? I mean, I think the loser of the game still making the college football playoff is maybe a little bit more difficult path than some have said it is. Not to say that you couldn't do that. Obviously, there'd still be a chance for both teams, but the winner really gains something. I would suggest for Georgia, you gain even more because it's the symbolic value of proving that you can beat a team that's proven in the past good enough to win a national championship. But for Clemson, they don't get a lot of proving grounds beyond Georgia. If you win this one, the rest of the season, I think, starts to feel pretty hollow. What do you make of the stakes for Georgia-Clemson?
Well, let's take Georgia. I mean, what it does, there's still a path for Georgia if they lose. Obviously, they could run the table and beat Alabama in the SEC championship game 12-1. That puts you in. But what it does is it takes away their margin for error. Now they've got to win everything else. They have only one path if they lose. And same thing for Clemson. You know, Clemson, if they win, then they can run the table, and the 13-0 they're going to get in. They're going to play North Carolina or Miami in the ACC championship game, and they're going to win that game. So what this game is that can the losers still get there? Yes. Is it infinitely more difficult if you lose this game? Absolutely, no question.
Yeah, and look, for Georgia, the build-up to this has obviously been about, hey, year 2 for Todd Monken, first full year for JT Daniels. Mm-hmm. Injuries slow that down some, but how much do you think the outlook for Georgia is different on the basis of the injuries? And I guess, for someone who's watched Georgia football for a long time, how ready do you think Georgia is for a game like this?
I think they're ready. I picked Georgia to win this game back in June. I'm picking Georgia to win this game this week. Yes, I know all the stories about the injuries, and they're not insignificant. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is Georgia has been building towards this team in recruiting for a while. And this team, even if there are questions at wide receiver and questions in the depth at secondary, this team still checks all the boxes. And so, I like Georgia in this game. I will say this will be the best defensive line that Georgia maybe will see this year. And I'm anxious to see if they can run the ball when they want to run the ball against Clemson.
I think Alabama and its string of Week 1 wins has been pretty remarkable. Of course, Alabama beats almost everyone, but such a similar vision year after year after year, just ready to go from the very first game of the season, and now Miami kind of finds itself in that spot coming up on Saturday. There are obviously a lot of people who think the Hurricanes have a chance to really make some noise in the ACC this year. What kind of chance do you give Miami to even keep it close against Alabama? Because most of these non-conference opponents in Week 1 scenarios against the Crimson Tide have not been able to keep it close. Do you think Miami can?
I think they can. I think the issue, Alabama lost so much, and we know that. 10 draft choices, 6 in the first round, Heisman Trophy winner, first-round quarterback, first-round running back, on and on and on. And so they're going to take a dip. The thing is, they can still win every single game they play. I think if Miami can keep Derek King healthy, keep him vertical, then Miami can hang in there for about a half. But what Alabama does, Brandon, you've seen it, they wear you down with their physicality and their depth. And I think over the course of 60 minutes, Miami will wear down, and Alabama wins, 2 touchdowns, 17 points, maybe more.
Obviously, Louisiana has been through so much, and, that seems like that's more prominent in the discussion, and it should be, compared to LSU playing a football game on Saturday. But obviously there is curiosity with the fact that, this is an LSU team trying to bounce back. They get a road game. You can make a case the road game comes at a good time because it takes them away from what they might be dealing with back home. They've been displaced a lot over the course of the last few days. What do you think the outlook is for LSU, not just going on the road, less than a touchdown favorite against UCLA, but beyond that? Is this a team that has kind of shaken off the doldrums of a year ago, and do you think that LSU is kind of back near the front end of contending the SEC West once again?
Yeah, I'm not there yet, Brandon. I've got some of my friends who tell me that LSU is going to bounce back in a big way. I haven't seen it yet. They've got to prove that last year, the 5-5 of the last year, was an aberration, and that 2019, when they won the national championship, is the norm in terms of their competitive. And they're playing a UCLA team who I think is better than a lot of people give them credit for. Now they beat a terrible Hawaii team last week, But I think Chip Kelly's finally got his team the way he wants to shape. I think LSU wins the game, but I think it's going to be close.
I want to try to bounce around a couple other things real quick while I have you. On Thursday, Tennessee opens the season, and listen, I don't live in Knoxville. I'm obviously not going to Tennessee practices. But here's the case I've tried to make for Tennessee, that if I was Josh Heupel, knowing that the goal here is to still be employed 3 years from now, that to a degree, planning for the future just makes some sense. And I realize that Joe Milton is at one point in time a big name. You bring him in from Michigan, but the reason why he was available, because he didn't exactly shine, during his time there in Ann Arbor. If it was me, and this is kind of a dumb thing to say because I'm not at practice, and clearly, Heupel and his assistants had a chance to see what happened there. But it just seems like you want to pick a guy like Harrison Bailey as your starting quarterback, who's younger, who chose not to transfer when Jeremy Pruitt got fired, when a bunch of other people did. Am I missing something here in terms of the value of the short-term gain by playing Milton when you maybe had a chance to play for the future and kind of build something around Harrison Bailey a little bit? Where would you come down on that for a guy in Josh Heupel who has to just try to avoid being embarrassing, I guess, in his first year at Tennessee?
I talked to somebody today who's really close to the Tennessee program and has a lot of conversations with people over there. And they said in practice that it was just really, really obvious that Joe Milton was going to give them the best chance to win. And that's why they're going with him. Although that same person did tell me they have bright, bright hopes for Harrison Bailey, who they think is going to be very good. But yeah, the question is, are you building towards the future, or do you want to win today? And today, or Thursday night, I was just told that Milton gives them the best chance to win.
I'll finish with this. There has been just a little bit of chatter that doesn't seem to go away about the idea that maybe Anthony Richardson is still a part of the quarterback conversation there in Florida. Obviously, Emory Jones got a lot of the offseason hype, but, man, it seems like that Richardson stuff still kind of exists. I think FAU is kind of an interesting week one opponent for Florida, but beyond that, do you get the sense this is fully Emory Jones's job, fully, his to control there at Florida, or is there a chance that Dan Mullen will do, as he hinted that he might do going back to spring practice, which is give a couple of quarterbacks a chance to play a significant amount of time?
Well, what I've said all spring and summer is that Emory Jones has to prove that he's an every down SEC quarterback. Now he's played in 24 games. He has seen significant action, but he has not yet proven that he can be the guy down in, down out. And so, yeah, I've heard the same things about Richardson as you have, and I'm anxious to see myself. But I think they go into the season wanting him, Emory Jones, to be the guy, and I'm anxious to see. And look, they got to play Alabama on September 18th, so they better get it figured out pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Such a fascinating cross-divisional game there in the SEC. Tony, it's so great to hear your insight, and I just have a good time every time you and I get a chance to speak. And, of course, I know you've written some very interesting things over the course of this offseason there as well, kind of getting folks primed for what's about to take place. So remind people where they can find you online, whether it be Twitter or at the media guides there, the great work that you're doing. How can folks find the stuff that you're doing online?
Well, I'm in business with two other guys. We have our own website. It's under the SI.com umbrella, SI.com/colleges/TMG. And that stands for the media guides. We've got Mark Blaushin up in Boston, Herb Gould in Chicago, and I sort of try to take care of things down south. And we have a lot of fun.
Well, Tony, it's great to have you here, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon once we kind of figure out how some of these teams are heading for the upcoming season. But thanks for being here on SEC Country Live, and we'll look forward to the chance to chat with you again very soon.
You bet, Brandon.
Good stuff there from Tony Barnhart. I love the stuff that he's doing. It's always fun. I mean, I just think that Tony's such a respected voice around the SEC. Always nice to get a chance to speak to him. And I'll also remind you as well that this portion of the show, that conversation and the fun we're having right now, is presented in part by our friends at Merriweather and Tharp. Listen, we have a good time talking SEC on a show like this. It's always a great thing to be able to do. But for many of you, there's another parallel to all of this, unpleasant conversation that might be going on with you. And that's the divorce process. And an audience the size of ours, tens of thousands of people that watch this show each and every week, I think the fact is that, statistics would show that many of you are dealing with a challenging time. You may find yourself either going through a divorce, maybe about to go through a divorce, or something along those lines, and that can be a scary and confusing process. But here's the thing that you can know, that the entire thing can be made better when you've got a strong advocate on your side, someone who understands the law, understands how all of that works for you. And that's what Merriweather and Tharp provides. You can find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's the website, theatlantadivorceteam.com. No matter where you live, you may have questions or, curiosity about, how the divorce process plays out. The great thing about Merriweather and Tharp is they have tons of free resources right there on their website. Blog posts, podcasts, things like that. You can be educated about this. You can have a free initial consultation with them and then take that next step to put them to work for you. So please find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That'll get you in touch with Merriweather and Tharp. Great to have them as a part of what we're doing here today on SEC Country Live, your source for Georgia divorce, also a great resource for all of those around the South as well. All right, here's what's still to come on our show today. Interesting news coming into Texas A&M for seemingly the same thing they're always doing, which is spending money in a big way. We'll talk about that. Also, big addition to the Florida roster. We'll address that. We'll look ahead to Tennessee, as we said, opening the season on Thursday night. So we'll try to cover all of that before we're done. But for now, as we think about week one, you start thinking about point spreads, and such a fun time to talk to our buddy Barry Barger, of course, who reminds us at BetUS there's a big sign-up deposit bonus on your way as a new customer there. So make sure you go to betus.com. Make sure you use the promo code SEC125. You can get that 125% bonus on your initial deposit when you do that. And Barry, our long wait is over. The games are here. And there are a couple of these that I find pretty fascinating right now. First of all, that Georgia-Clemson game, still kind of hovering right around a field goal favorite there for Clemson. I got to imagine when you pay close attention to BetUS, the handle on a game like that's got to be pretty big, right? Maybe the most bet game of the weekend, at least on the college side of things.
This might be one of the biggest bet games of the year. We don't get a marquee matchup like this, like opening week, very often. I don't remember. This is like huge. Even we've had a couple big ones lately, but these two teams, now these are the two that are right there, kind of, in my opinion, like who's going to be the heir to Bama if they slip this year, in my opinion. And so the handle's been huge, and it moved up to 3.5, came back down to 3. The injuries, most of the guys for Georgia seem to be good. A few are going to play, and then and it's not as bad as it was 2 weeks ago, a weekend ago, and so that's good news. But everybody's so excited. I mean, with the fans and everything, that brings in a whole bunch more action on this. So and your players, you guys make sure you use that SEC thing so you get this max bonus, the SEC 125. It's SEC 200 also if you want to do crypto, because you can get 200% for crypto. That's, they're really pushing it, and take advantage of that. I mean, that's a one-time deal, so fire it up, get ahead.
Yeah, no doubt about that. That's an incredible savings when you use the SEC 200 on the crypto deposit. As folks, we've been saying that you put in just simple math here, your initial deposit, you're getting double that back. So let's say you put in, $100 with the SEC 125, they're going to give you $125, dollars back on top of that 125% bonus. With the crypto, you're talking about 200% value coming back. You're literally a winner before you even place your first bet, because you start off with more money in your account than you yourself deposited. That's a great thing all the way around. Let me ask you this, Barry, because obviously week one, when it comes to college football, we see a lot of big point spreads, whether it be, Kentucky's like a 29-point favorite at BetUS right now over a Louisiana Monroe team whose season win total over-under is only a game and a half or something like that. I mean, you see a lot of big point totals.
Right.
And for some bettors, like the big spreads, to stay away automatically because, hey, you can't really control the action in such a wide spread, and every little thing can kind of affect you there when you're dealing with like a 30-point spread, which you see a lot across the SEC here this week. What's your personal philosophy on that? Do you see occasionally big value in big spreads? Or are you, for the most part, looking for narrow action to place your wagers on?
No. Sometimes those big spreads you can still take advantage of them, because it's a reason that it's that high. And once you get up to, I would say a 28, 35, like when you get those big ones like that, and it'll scare a lot of people off, but don't be scared, because a lot of times those are like 40, 50 game winners. Even in the Bama game, 19.5 now. It's creeping up towards that 21 what I thought. But they've won the last, 10 years, every opening game by double digits.
Yeah.
And they've been playing, like Michigan and Tech and Florida State and Missouri. They haven't been playing any slouches. So look at it, that might be one to play early because, like I said, I've been saying it's good. I think it's going to go to 21, and I still think it will. So if you want to take the plus, wait on that 21. But don't be scared of those big. There's a reason to take the big numbers, and there's a reason not to. Once you get over like 27, then it starts skewing the other way where it's a good idea to lay it a lot of times.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to go high enough on some of those. In my experience, I've been watching those, especially early in the season, first 2 or 3 weeks. So, take advantage of those if you can, for sure.
Speaking of take advantage, great chance to take advantage of a big deposit bonus. Go to BetUS.com. Listen, BetUS been doing this for more than 25 years, and you can't stick around that long unless you're taking good care of your players. That's what BetUS is known for. Biggest, best incentives in the entire industry, including for you. When you sign up for the very first time here, you can get the 125% bonus when you use SEC 125. That's SEC 125. That'll give you a 125% bonus. And when you go to BetUS.com and use SEC 200 and you deposit crypto, they're going to give you a 200% bonus just for depositing the crypto in the account there with BetUS. It is a tremendous opportunity to take advantage of a big bonus when you get signed up with BetUS at BetUS.com. Barry, good luck with your action on the games here this weekend, and can't wait to talk more about this to you next week.
You bet, and don't forget about live betting out there. That's a good chance to get back some or pump it up for you, too, on all those games. Live betting's huge now. So, thank you very much. It's a pleasure every week, Brandon.
Looking forward to it, Barry. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time there. And, you talk about live betting being fun. That's a good time because
thank you.
in some of those instances, Barry, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much. In some of those instances, the feel of the game tells you how to go, right? Like take Alabama and Miami, for instance, on this. Alabama, big favorite, 3 touchdowns. But listen, there's some people who say, does Bama want to run the football here? New quarterback starting for the first time, new offensive coordinator, influence of Doug Marrone in that play calling scenario there. Is this an Alabama team that wants to be a little bit more conservative than it was a year ago when led by Steve Sarkisian? And first couple drives give you a little bit of a taste of that. Is this heading for a lower scoring game where it's harder to cover the 3 touchdown number? Or is it heading for the kind of explosive Alabama game where you have a better chance of covering that? So the live in-game wagering, the likes of which you can find there at BetUS.com, a lot of fun all the way around there. Okay, so here's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to do a lot in a little bit of time here. More of your comments on both Facebook and YouTube. I have not done any YouTube comments today, so we'll do those. We'll do a few more Facebooks, and then we'll talk about some of the other big news that's out there, and we'll kind of finish on a funny note there as well with our SEC LOL. So on YouTube, then Facebook for some comments, then we'll bounce out of here. Brent Hickman weighing in to say that it seems like everybody but Bama and Clemson live in the past these days. Yes, I'm including us Dogs fans. We know 41 years. And Brent, here's the thing. You and I are both fellow Georgia fans. We have an understanding of this together that I think when it comes to Georgia, the past that truly haunts UGA is not 1980, because the fact of the matter is, like, I'm in my early 40s. I'm barely even alive for all of that. That's not particularly relevant for me. It's even less relevant for the players who, clearly, they weren't even a consideration when all of that, 1980 storyline was playing out. But the relevant past for Georgia is the recent past. What happened in 2020 when you had a chance to do some things and came up just short. Or 2019 when you had a chance to do some things, came up just short. When you thought you might follow up a playoff year from 2017 with more success in 2018, once again came up just short. It's that actual recent past that I believe is more relevant for Georgia. But admittedly, the thing that you're describing is a little bit of an issue for college football, and it's why there's so much discussion about, expanding the playoff and doing things to incentivize other leagues to perform well. Because I think there is a sense from the college football brass, the leaders of this sport, that, as you said, hey, there's only a couple of teams that aren't living in the past. And unfortunately for most of our audience, if you're a fan of like 3/4 of the SEC, you start the year knowing you really have almost no chance of winning the national championship. If that's true for teams within the SEC, Imagine how true that is for the majority of the rest of college football. And so I think one of the things you're going to see a push towards in the years to come is a broadening of the opportunities where more teams can legitimately say that maybe they do have a chance to compete for a championship. Dallas Swartz checking in here. Of course, Dallas representing Southern California, a big USC fan. Fun to have him here. John Freeman, a Georgia fan, looking forward to that game against Clemson on Saturday. A lot of Georgia fans weighing in here. You'd love to be able to see that. Nature Gator, Florida fan over here on YouTube, says Florida's got two excellent quarterbacks in Jones and Richardson. Both are going to play Saturday and against Bama. I agree with you that they have two quarterbacks. I think both of them will play, and I guess it remains to be seen if they'll both play against Alabama. But it truly remains to be seen if they both truly are, as you say, excellent. We'll find that out for ourselves. G. Grace Bama Boy, the Alabama fan, on the subject of pulling for other SEC teams. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. G. Grace sings, I can't pull for Tennessee and I can't pull for Auburn. And I guess there are plenty of Alabama fans who probably feel that way. Let's see what else is in our YouTube comment section. Then we'll check back over on Facebook. By the way, it's good to have you with us here on SEC Country Live here today. G. Grace and the subject. See, I started with Georgia on today's show, and I got a little bit of the heat for that because I do Dog Nation Daily, right? And I talk about Georgia on that show each and every day. But here's the thing, and I'm telling you right now, if you want to audit me on this, you can, whether it be Nature Gator, who was giving me a hard time, or somebody else. If you go back and listen to SEC Country Live over the course of the last few weeks, you can make a case that I haven't talked about Georgia enough, because in the previous iteration of SEC Country Live, we were talking about Georgia as much as we talked about some of the other teams in the SEC. The last few weeks, I really haven't done topic on Georgia very much, and this is the first time today that I've ever started the show by talking about Georgia, but this is the big game of the week between Georgia and Clemson, so I feel like in that particular case it's justified. Plus, the audio that I played from Kirk Herbstreit had literally just been spoken. I was a part of a conference call with him in the hour prior to this show starting. So, big game, relevant comments from Kirk Herbstreit haven't really been aired anywhere else yet. All of that equaled starting the show with the day. We won't always start the show with Georgia. In fact, since we rebooted the show back in March, I don't think we've started the show with Georgia hardly ever other than that. As I said before, you can make a case we don't talk about Georgia enough. Not that we talk about Georgia too much because, listen, I am sensitive to that. I am very honest about being a Georgia fan, but very open about my desire to make this a gathering place and a meeting spot for the rest of the SEC. And maybe sometimes we veer too much in the direction of not talking about Georgia because Georgia is clearly one of the higher-ranked teams in the SEC. So I will defend myself on that, and I believe that my comments would stand up to scrutiny and audit if you go back and rewatch recent week shows. I think you'd see there has not been an imbalance of Georgia talk. Now, there are a lot of Georgia fans in the comments section because we do Dog Nation Daily, and a lot of those folks from that show migrate over here. That's certainly true, but that's only because our folks are loyal. Let's go back over here on Facebook for a moment. Philip Keeley says, I hope you're right about Alabama replacing a lot on offense. Yeah, I mean, I understand that they are, and I think there is a chance that over the course of the year, this may be an Alabama team that proves to be a little more. I mean, go back to 2017 for a moment. What Bama averaged per game that year? Some of y'all better at this than I am. In fact, you could Google it while I'm talking. But somewhere in the neighborhood of, 37, 38 points per game, something along those lines. That was Bama's average in about 2017. And in the 3 years since then, 18, 19, 20, Bama's been in the high 40s. Clemson's been in the 40s. LSU scored 50 points a game almost in 2019. Bama about scored 50 points a game a year ago. So we've seen this huge offensive explosion in the last 3 years. There's a chance this Alabama team this year, because maybe you feel better about, your running backs than you do, your brand new quarterback. I mean, I do think they want to take Ajayi Hall out for a spin. They want to take John Mechie in kind of the lead receiver role out for a spin. They want to see what they have there. Whatever's going on with your little Billingsley, I guess I'll try to figure that out at some point in time. But they want to keep the passing game going there. But maybe this is an Alabama offense that looks a little bit more like the one that Jalen Hurts led for most of 2017 than it does the ones that Mac Jones led last year and Tua Tagovailoa led the years prior to that. Epic Robinson, always good to see his comments. Steve Rogers says Georgia has unfinished business. Dogs will make it 4 out of 5 on Florida. So that's a Georgia fan feeling pretty good. about all of that stuff. Philip Key says, I still laugh at this guy that's doing this podcast was making fun of Tua. Bama defense will be a lot better. Wait, was I making fun of Tua Tagovailoa? I don't remember doing that, but maybe I did, but I don't think so. True Glenn says Texas A&M's ranked right, regardless of take. Thank goodness we have football back where they can settle on the field over the season. He gives you a gig 'em. In fact, that's a pretty good place for us to pick back up our content. We'll get back to the comments here in a moment, but we did want to mention Texas A&M today because there is news involving the Aggies here over the course of the last 24 hours or so. Reports coming out of College Station that they're about to give Jimbo Fisher another big contract extension. Now, I kind of laugh at this because, listen, and if you're not an Aggie fan, you probably already know this, there are a lot of people who don't like Jimbo Fisher. Now, the truth is, I like Jimbo. In fact, if you look at our screen up here, this is kind of above where you see like the shelf. Somebody put the Texas A&M helmet right there on top as a way of making fun of me because they think I talk too much about Texas A&M on the show each and every day. So that was kind of their way of kind of mocking me on that. Normally we put the two teams that played in the most recent SEC championship on the top shelf, or we kind of, when there's big SEC games, we'll put those helmets there. But somebody took the Alabama-Florida helmets off the shelf and put Texas A&M up there. So that's a way of mocking me because the truth is I'm a pretty big A&M. I don't want to say I'm an A&M fan, but I respect Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M, and I do believe they have a chance to be 11-1 this year. Not winning the SEC West. I'll still take Alabama to do that, but the threshold for an 11-win season is absolutely there for Texas A&M here this year. But the point is, while I may feel that way, there are plenty of people who are watching us right now that do not feel that way. And one of the reasons they don't feel that way, I think the genesis for that is the contract that Jimbo has at Texas A&M. He's been previously paid like $7.5 million. That is a bunch of money, and that is a lot to try to live up to when it comes to the expectations that come with that salary. And ironically, so last year you finally have the kind of season where Jimbo sort of proves himself as moving in the direction of being worth that money. And yet now, on the heels of that, Texas A&M's like, we're going to give you even more money. And I think this is what this speaks to. And this is what the SEC is about to be like in the years to come. Texas A&M shows, because they're about to pay Jimbo like more than $9 million, or really an extravagant salary. I ain't mad at nobody for the money they earn. I'm trying to get paid. I want everybody else to get paid too. So I got no beef with Jimbo over his salary. But it is a lot of money for a guy that has not won huge yet at Texas A&M. We'll all acknowledge that. I think what this speaks to is this is Texas A&M showing you what they are going to be about. They are going to spend big on staff. They're going to spend big to keep coordinators in place. They're going to spend big on Jimbo Fisher. That in the future, the line of demarcation between the haves and the have-nots in the SEC is just going to grow even wider. I mean, we think of the SEC as being this really big, powerful league. Everyone's moneyed. Everyone's well-resourced. But the truth is, the top half of this league has always had way more at its disposal than the bottom half. And by the time you get to the bottom half of the SEC, some of these programs are, even though they're bringing in the big, split-up media rights fee checks, and even though they're bringing in all that revenue, it's still not easy. A lot of these SEC teams are in pretty small states, and in the case of, like, say, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, that's two teams that have to split a small state with each other. Or for a University of South Carolina, also a small state, that has to split that with its in-state rival Clemson from the ACC. Or, like take LSU and Louisiana. LSU is a very powerful program, but Louisiana's not a very big state. And, that, size matters when it comes to money and things like that. Well, Texas is obviously a gigantic state. A&M happens to have very wealthy boosters. And as they get ready to welcome in their in-state rival Texas into this league, and, some of the things are going to go along with that, I think you're going to move into an era where, unfortunately, and I don't say this because, I'm probably not all that excited about this being true, but it seems like that's where we're going. We're heading to an era in which money is about to be more important in the SEC than it's even been before. You can say, well, money's been the name of the whole game recently. It's about to be even more so the name of the game in the future, and I think Texas A&M is trying to show you on the basis of the Jimbo Fisher contract that they expect to be a player in this new SEC. No one's going to outspend them. Now, you can't buy a championship, but you can certainly buy yourself the opportunity to compete for one, and Texas A&M is clearly going to do that. Let me mention this for a moment. So there was interesting news in the SEC over the course of the last couple of days with a name that we mentioned on a show previously, Tyrone Truesdale, the former Auburn starter along the defensive line, who is, and you see the news there on your screen, the Gators adding a defensive line transfer in the person of Tyrone Truesdale. He started at Auburn for a couple of years, left the program, and I guess I was responsible for telling y'all some inaccurate information because, I mean, I was under the impression that the deadline for notifying your intent to transfer was July 1st. So when Truesdale announced his transfer from Auburn after that, I just assumed that rule mattered. And that meant that he had to go to like FCS if he wanted to play this year, that ultimately this was a guy who just kind of decided he just didn't want to be at Auburn anymore, but not necessarily a factor to go somewhere else at the SEC or FBS level because he was doing all of this post-July 1st. But come to find out that date, I guess, doesn't mean as much as I thought it did. Truesdale, because, I mean, some of the Auburn media reporting that because he's a graduate transfer, he can just kind of slide in and be eligible right away. I think it's interesting to see that Florida defensive coordinator Todd Grantham says that Truesdale may play this Saturday against Florida Atlantic. At least that's one of the things I believe I read about Grantham on Truesdale before that. And, you know, on the one hand, this is a huge loss for Auburn, right? I mean, I get the impression that Brian Harson's heading for a pretty rough first year there on the Plains. They play a really tough schedule. They need all the help they can get. Losing a starter in your defensive line is a step in the wrong direction in light of all of that. So it's a bad loss for Auburn. Most programs, if you could bring in a defensive line starter from somebody else in this league, especially a group that had played good defense led by Kevin Steele the last couple of years, Florida's no different than anybody else. You're clearly going to do that. But here's the point I would make about all of this, is that if you're Florida, you do have to be a little bit careful here. Truesdale makes you better on the field, and, you know, obviously this is a Florida team that was disastrous defensively in the games that mattered most a year ago, and that really hangs over their head. Go back and listen to some of the stuff that Dan Mullen said at SEC Media Days. You just kind of get the impression that he just wasn't that happy, with good reason, with his defensive performance last season. And so you bring in a guy like Truesdale trying to really remove the stench from some pretty embarrassing late-season performances. Bowl game against Oklahoma, awful. They kept it close against Alabama in the SEC championship on the heels of a explosive Florida offense, but the defensive performance was awful. Defense played terrible against LSU at the end of the regular season. This is a defense that really got exposed late last year in games that would have mattered for Florida, would have given them a chance, at least in the case of Alabama and LSU, to be in the college football playoff conversation. Just didn't go down that way. So you're trying to be better defensively. A guy like Truesdale gives you a chance to do that. But, man, this is not a free lunch. There is a price to be paid for this. I mean, can you imagine for a Dan Mullen coach Florida situation where it's not like the Gators have exactly been well ingrained with the recruiting culture in the state of Florida right now, right? I mean, Florida's not cleaning up on the recruiting trail in-state, nationally, anywhere else. And this, I believe, just becomes more fodder for negative recruitment. I'm not saying it's a reason that Florida shouldn't have taken Truesdale, because almost any team would have taken a player like this that was capable of starting the SEC. But you're going to have a lot of opposing college coaches going to high schools all across the Sunshine State and saying, look what Florida did. They had a bunch of guys. They took them through spring practice. They took them through summer practice. They told them that this was going to be their spot. And then like a couple days before the first game, they're bringing in some dude from Auburn. They're saying he's going to play, and everybody now gets slotted down a spot in the pecking order. That's the kind of thing that can come back to haunt you in the recruiting trail a little bit. And listen, some of the best players in the Florida program have been transfers. We'll all acknowledge that, right? I mean, they have brought in some big names via the transfer portal. In fact, guys like DeMarcus Bowman, the former running back from Clemson, who's there now, these are guys who expect to be some of the best players on the team here this year. Florida's chances of competing in the SEC East in a lot of ways will be built on the backs of some transfer players. But the high school players, which is really supposed to be the lifeblood of your talent acquisition efforts, they notice when you bring in a transfer this late in the process. So the Truesdale thing for Florida, if you're a Gators fan, you better hope it pays off, because other than that, people are going to be noticing this. Let's do a couple other topics here really pretty quick, and then we'll try to get a couple of your comments before we wrap up things today. It was interesting to hear this from Tony Barnhart. This is one of the reasons why I like having guys like that on the show. I told Tony that when it comes to Tennessee on Thursday against Bowling Green, they're about a 35-point favorite or so against Bowling Green, that if I was a Vols fan, I would have been hoping for a coaching decision with my naming of a starting quarterback that built for the future more so than tried to salvage what could be gotten out of the present. And I still stand by that opinion, but obviously I acknowledge that, listen, I'm not at practice. I'm not seeing what's happening in Knoxville each and every day. And it was interesting to hear Tony say, well, I've talked to people who were, and they said Joe Milton made it clear that he was the best guy for the job right now. Now, Tony also tried to say, yet they're still really high on Harrison Bailey. Here's the thing you got to understand. I think that Tony probably understands this. He's just relaying this, what he's getting from sources in Knoxville. You can't have it both ways because guys like Harrison Bailey, I mean, he put it out there when Pruitt was on the verge of getting fired that he only came to Tennessee because Jeremy Pruitt. You know, the idea that he's going to stick around and wait forever if a guy like Joe Milton, who was not great at Michigan, is the guy that Josh Heupel puts his trust in when they're at Tennessee, it could very well be that this was the only choice to be made. As Tony said, maybe Milton really just made it that clear. It sounds like that's kind of what happened. But this is the bed you're making for yourself, and you're about to have to, lay down in it if you're Tennessee here, because my guess is Harrison Bailey's not sticking around to be Joe Milton's backup if that's the way all of this is going there. But it'll be fun to watch Tennessee on Thursday. I'm a big believer this is a bad football team. I think their over-under season total of 6 is one of the easiest unders on the board, regardless of conference. But I also think this is a team that could score some points. They could lose in high-scoring fashion fairly frequently. And seeing them, if they're moving the ball against Bowling Green on Thursday, that could be an indication that's the direction we're heading with all of that. I'll finish with a couple other games in the SEC here before we get more of your comments. LSU going on the road to UCLA, Ole Miss going to Atlanta to take on Louisville. Which of those two SEC teams, both favored, LSU in a true road game in Pasadena, Ole Miss in Atlanta against Louisville, which of those is the safer bet? I'll say it's LSU, and not just because it's the more narrow spread. Or narrower? I guess more narrow. Yeah, the more narrow spread. I think when you look at Ole Miss, there's a weird thing going on here where we got Rebels fans who are watching, and I'm not intentionally disparaging your team, but I will have to be honest that I think it's been really interesting to see the way in which Lane Kiffin has kind of become the darling of the offseason. People really believe that he's going to turn things around at Ole Miss, so much so that Rebels ranked in the coaches poll. But if you look at their record against the spread from a year ago, you don't really see much example of why that'd be the case. They were just 4-5 against the number. That this is not a team that really did much in the way of exceeding expectations a year ago. Yes, they played Alabama close, but at a certain point in time, you just stop dining out on that. And they're a 9.5-point favorite in Atlanta against Louisville on Monday. It's a Monday night game. Don't forget that, folks. And I'm just not quite so sure it's going to be quite so easy for Ole Miss there in that spot. By comparison, it's an LSU team who I do think is chomping at the bit. New defensive system, one that better employs the talent that LSU obviously has on that side of the ball. Max Johnson was my pick to be starting quarterback. No matter what had happened with Miles Brennan, we were confirmed on that last week with Jordy Colletta doing a good job covering LSU, basically backing that up when he joined us on the show last week. So I'm not quite so sure it's super easy for LSU in Pasadena. I think that UCLA, they got a win against Hawaii last week. I'm not quite so sure it's a cakewalk for LSU in Pasadena against UCLA. But if you're giving me the choice of LSU minus the 4, Ole Miss minus the 9.5, I'll take LSU as the most likely to cover there in that spot. Eric Herbst, by the way, says Ole Miss has no D, and that's kind of the problem, Eric, and I think you're right about that. You got to play some defense. You got to be average. I mean, there's 130 teams in FBS football. There is something to be said for being 65th defensively, right? I mean, there's something to be said for just being average defensively, especially if you're moving the football and scoring points. But on the heels of losing, Jacquez Jones to Kentucky, the transfer linebacker, and some of the other things that have gone on, I think Ole Miss's chances to even be average defensively are probably not all that great there. Lawrence Robinson says, kind of going back and forth with a commenter about LSU, which is always kind of fun to see. Deontay Julian, one of our resident Florida fans, he's checking in on this as well. Deontay, glad to have you here on all of that. Let's get a few more Facebook comments before we get ready to do some fun SEC LOL type stuff on the way out the door here. Jerry Popham says, so Tennessee opens on Thursday. Some team has to be the first to go out 0-1. Jerry, if they struggle against Bowling Green, they're like oh my gosh, can you imagine? Like a 5-touchdown favorite. Can you imagine how – and listen, the one thing a lot of our audience has in common, whether you're a Georgia fan, Florida fan, Alabama fan, there are a lot of y'all that don't like Tennessee. And there are a lot of you that are loving the misery that Tennessee's endured in recent years. So if they struggle against Bowling Green, it is going to be – I mean, it's just going to be vicious in the comment section. Epic Robinson says Tennessee's a dumpster fire. To a degree, they indeed are. Wesley Gaines, by the way. Oh, so this is the comment that kind of got some folks fired up. He says October 9th, Kentucky's going to show some folks how to beat LSU in football. So that's a Kentucky fan feeling pretty good about the Wildcats against LSU. I think it'd be a pretty fun game. I am very curious against Louisiana Monroe to see this new look Kentucky offense. I mean, obviously they're going to run the ball a ton with Rodriguez, but with Levis at quarterback, I'm pretty curious. Offensive line-wise, they're going to be pretty good, and Mark Stoops always good defensively, so I'm pretty interested in the Wildcats this year. I would say that I probably am. Lawrence Robinson also reminding us that Florida has 2 defensive linemen from Auburn, which is a pretty good point. Let's see anything else on Facebook before we go back over to YouTube to finish things out. Brian Whitehead says Bowling Green was 0-5 last year, yet not good at all. Or in Chile, also getting excited about that Georgia-Florida game. And like the rest of y'all, no matter which side you're on, I can't wait for that one. On YouTube, to close out our comments here for today, Foster Moss says he believes the Alabama defense will be top 5 this season. I mean, some of that, I guess, is contingent on the health of LeBron Ray. I mean, obviously, Will Anderson, I think, is one of the most dynamic pass rushers in recent Alabama history, one of the best players in the SEC, regardless of position. So when you're thinking about Alabama doing big things defensively, a lot of that you're putting on Anderson because he's such an effective pass rusher. George checks in and says, I don't even pay attention that closely, and I knew a year ago that Max Johnson would be the starting quarterback for LSU, regardless of what happened with Miles Brennan. Yeah, I think, George, that's pretty a fair thing to say. I mean, listen, Brennan had his chance to win that job a couple of years ago, didn't do it. That's what ushered in the Joe Burrow era. So the idea that he was going to, after all of that, then emerge after the fact, I just never quite bought into that. But I do think that Max Johnson is a good player. Let me get Rhett Womack here, who says, I'm not like everyone else who's ready to crown Bryce Young as the next Tua Tagovailoa, but they have an elite defense and plenty of playmakers. I think they beat Florida by at least 17 points. That's one of those early season games that's already getting a lot of attention. Cody Ledoux's in the comments section. Always good to see Cody stirring things up in there. Anything else comment-wise? Probably not. We got to get ready to go. So we just like to kind of close up the show on kind of a light note, and obviously hope all of you are getting ready for a fun weekend. Remember, it's 6 days in a row. Starting tonight, there's a game, and with somebody, I forget whom, and then Tennessee on Thursday. Who's playing tonight? Y'all remind me. Who's playing tonight? Tennessee. Oh yeah, UAB plays tonight. That's good times. Bill Clark's bunch. UAB. Listen, they got 3 votes in the coaches poll. They been to a bowl game like 4 years in a row. That's not bad football. I don't mind watching the Blazers. Good stuff there all the way around on that. But the point is, starts tonight, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday you got college football there as well. So that's 6 consecutive days of college football. And by the time we're back here again next Wednesday, we will have a lot to talk about. So let's finish today on a light note before we all get really angry about what we see over the course of these next few days, one way or another. The big story of last weekend, you may have seen this. And listen, I'm a guy, and for those of you who may not be aware, I call high school football games on the weekend here in the Atlanta area on Peachtree TV. If you're around the South, you can stream at CBS46.com. And you're talking about like big prospects all across the country. A lot of the, based here in the state of Georgia, but Gunnar Stockton, quarterback going to UGA, we're going to have him on TV this weekend. The point here is this, is that high school football on TV is something that's pretty important to me. So when you think about, some of the high school football that's on television across the country, when something happens, you have a tendency to notice that, including this past weekend, when IMG Academy was playing on ESPN. And supposedly they were playing a team called Bishop Sycamore, who, come to find out, was There's no such thing as Bishop Sycamore. There's no such thing as the Bishop Sycamore team. The quarterback apparently has already graduated high school in Maryland, came to Ohio to play for Sycamore. They were supposed to play a national schedule. Now all of that's called into question. The head coach had an arrest warrant. By now you're probably fairly familiar with the Bishop Sycamore story and all of this, and that kind of got brought back up into the world of memes when former Auburn quarterback Cam Newton got cut from the New England Patriots, because it seems like pretty much everybody had the same joke about Newton getting dropped by the Patriots, about what his next move would be, keeping in mind the team that we had just seen get blown out by IMG Academy on ESPN. I'll show you a funny example of this. So NFL Memes on Twitter says, Cam Newton agrees to a 2-year deal with, you guessed it, Bishop Sycamore. And there you see Cam Newton wearing the Bishop Sycamore jersey. So pretty funny stuff all the way around there on that. So the Bishop Sycamore story is one of those that I can't quite get enough of, and kind of fun to see some folks having some fun with the former Auburn quarterback and Heisman Trophy winner Cam Newton throughout all of that. We really appreciate all of you being with us for SEC Country Live here today. We're back again next Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll look forward to talking to you about everything from Week 1 in college football and then what happens after that. We will see you then right here on SEC Country Live.